Hello, everyone, and welcome to a short introductory video. This is a combination of things that I oftentimes show in the first week or so of demonstrations in the Excel course. And so obviously in an online format, we can't have the same kind of interactive demonstrations, but this will give you a taste of some of the things, and you can certainly listen to it or watch it and follow along as it introduces some of the key ideas, especially in the first three chapters of the textbook. And so for MIS 260, the first three chapters of the textbook, or modules as they call them, are in the introductory level. Technically, the authors call the first four chapters the introductory level, so we're going to take that as one unit before our first test. But the first three chapters are ones where it almost makes more sense to consider them in their entirety than to necessarily have separate pieces on each one in terms of demonstration. Obviously, we have had and will have separate homework assignments on chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3, whether that be the SAM path, where you're getting some practice learning some of the techniques, and then in the SAM projects, where you're putting it to use to take a spreadsheet that's half created and then apply these things to it. And ultimately, we'll add another variety of problems that we will have, that you will take a spreadsheet. It won't necessarily have the same step-by-step instructions, but I'll have to critically think my way through, what do I need to do? What do I know in terms of tools and techniques in order to apply to this spreadsheet to get it to calculate or tell me what the answer is that I'm after. So we'll have a number of different types of assignments. But in this example, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to start with a blank spreadsheet. Again, a lot of the SAM projects, actually all the SAM projects, give you a starting file where they've done some work, they've done some formatting, they've added content. There's a benefit to that because, again, data entry isn't the most exciting thing to do. And after you understand just a few basics of how the Excel interface works, it's just a function of time. But there are times, and in the real world, you're going to have to build a spreadsheet from scratch. And so the one we're going to build today is pretty simple. It won't take us as much time as you might imagine if I showed you the finished product here at the end. But we are going to, especially in these kind of critical thinking spreadsheet activities or software activities, use a blank spreadsheet and build something out, because ultimately when you get employed as an intern or as a full-time employee, that's what your supervisor, your boss, is going to expect. Or if you're an entrepreneur, that's what you're going to need to do. I need to build a spreadsheet to track this information, to do these calculations, etc. And so we are going to use an example that I've been using for a number of years, which is to build a spreadsheet that would show us a hypothetical student budget. And so in Excel, when I put my cursor in a combination of a row and a column, in this case, I clicked into cell B2, that's where I typed the word hypothetical student budget. And certainly one of the things you can do in an Excel spreadsheet is type text into a cell. Certainly we need labels, we need titles. You probably wouldn't write a religion paper or a history paper in it. You're not going to, write memos in it. But there are needs for text in a spreadsheet, and certainly it does give you a way to organize the page in a way that a normal Word document doesn't. And so sometimes people use Excel spreadsheets to build paper-based forms because it's easy to line things up. It's easy to have things coordinated in a way where, if I was in Microsoft Word, I go worry about spaces or tabs or things like that to organize the information on the printed page. And so I'm going to build a hypothetical student budget. When I build a budget, there are two pieces: money coming in, money going out. And so I'm going to have my income section. And our hypothetical student budget or student is going to have two jobs. Now, some of you work 2 jobs, some of you might work more than 2 jobs, some of you might not work at all. But in this case, I want to have 2 jobs for my hypothetical student because I do want to do some math. If I only have one number, there's not a lot of math I can do. So we're going to give them 2 jobs, and every budget is customizable. You can change the words, you can change the numbers. Maybe this person's getting investment income, and so they're wealthy, and so they're getting money every month from the stock market, or they won the lottery and they get $1 million every year. We can model all kinds of situations in a spreadsheet, and we're going to start. It is the beginning of the year, so I'm going to start with January. After January comes February. And again, all of us know the months of the year. We probably all know how to spell them. We might not be so good at typing them. But in Excel, there are a lot of things in Excel that are built for efficiency. The inventor of the electronic spreadsheet was a man named Dan Bricklin, who came up with the original spreadsheet program called VisiCalc. And part of his rationale was that humans are good at some things, computers are really good at other things. Why not make a piece of software like an spreadsheet that would let the computer take care of the math, take care of the things it's good at, and leave more time for the human to do the critical thinking, the problem solving, the what if thinking. And so, again, before the first spreadsheet program was created on one of the first personal computers, you had to do everything with pencil and paper. And so it was a very manual process. And so moving things to a computer certainly sped things up, made them more accurate. And over time, more and more functions, more and more features are added to Excel to, again, improve efficiency. And in the business world, efficiency relates to return on investment. If I spend the money to buy a computer and to buy the software, I don't want to do it just because it's cool, just because it's trendy, just because everybody else does it. Business is going to do it because if I spend the money on this technology, it's going to pay me back a return on investment. So, again, we're using the software in part for its efficiency. And even if I'm doing this for my own benefit, again, I want to be as efficient as possible, spend as least time doing the drudge work, more time either doing other things or more time doing thinking that the computer can't do. And so if I type in 2 months, January, February, and if I highlight them with the mouse, so I highlight January and February, I get a little black box in the bottom right corner of that region. When I put my cursor over it, the cursor changes to a black plus sign. You need to have a little good bit of eye-hand coordination, because now I'm going to hold down the left mouse button and drag to the right. And the benefit of that, as you can see from the preview, is I can drag this all the way out to column, what is that? Column N, and it's going to put all the months of the year in order, spelled correctly, automatically as soon as I let go of that, as I drag over and let go of the left mouse button. And so in that way, I can do that with months of the year. You can do it with values, and you can go up and down. So I'm just going to go down here and do something, and I'll erase it. But I can go 1, 2, copy it down. It will do 3, 4, 5, 6. Delete that. If I do 10, 20, it recognizes the pattern and it says, okay, well, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And so again, if I start a sequence and I copy it to the right, copy it to the left, copy it down, Excel is going to try to recognize that series and do its best to then extend that series out, following whatever pattern you have started. And so again, and I've had students in the past that were oftentimes working adults coming back to get a degree, and sometimes even something simple like that, people say like, wow, I used to spend, all kinds of time typing numbers from 1 to 500 because I needed to, assign ID numbers to our customers, and I didn't know that thing existed. Now, again, pretty simple technology thing, but those little things could save you a whole bunch of time. Or if you're, having to continually write the months of the year, the days of the week, other things that are repetitive, again, these little shortcuts can be hacks that improve your efficiency and let you do other things or just get your work done faster. And so When I do this in class, I oftentimes ask people, well, how much money does this student make at their job? I'm going to just make up some numbers sort of arbitrarily. Again, your numbers could be different. Let's say they make $1,000 a month at job one, and job two is a even more part-time job. So maybe they only make $200 a month. And again, in Excel, I have the flexibility. I can type in the numbers for February, for March, for April. If the numbers are the same, that's a lot of extra work. Again, it's not impossible. I can do it. I can type in 1,200 again and again and again, 11 more times. But if I'm assuming that the job one income is the same for all 12 months, I can do the same thing, except this time I only choose one cell, grab that fill handle on the lower right corner, drag it out, and Excel fills in $1,000 in each month. And for the second job, again, if I drag that across, it will put the value, in this case, $200 in each month. And again, I might make some changes to my budget, to my assumptions. Again, budgets are really about assumptions. So I might say, well, in the summer, June, July, and August, I'm going to move back home, or I'm going to go on vacation. And so I'm not going to work my second job, or maybe my second job is at a ski resort and they're not open in the summer. I could change, delete the values, put a zero in, add more money if I think, well, maybe I have more free time in the summer, so I'm going to work more hours. We can customize the numbers, however, but in terms of efficiency and filling in values, at least as a starting point, that fill handle helps us quite a bit. And if I want to know how much money am I making month by month, again, there's some easy things to do and some things that take advantage of Excel's capability. Hopefully, all of you could look at 1,200 and know, well, if I added them together, the answer is 1,200. But I don't want to type 1,200, and I don't want to type 1,200 again and again and again and again. That's repetitive. But I don't want to type 1,200 for January, because if for some reason in the future somebody came in here and said, well, let's make the 200 300, because I'm going to pick up an extra couple of shifts on a weekend. Well, if I add and change that number to 300, the correct calculation should be 1,000 plus 300, which would be 1,300. And if I type in 1,200, it's just going to always say 1,200. And I'd have to remember, when I change one of those job numbers, I got to automatically update that total. Instead, we'd like to take care of that using Excel's ability with cell references to say, well, let's Excel automatically do the math for me. And the way that we're going to do that at first here is with an Excel formula. In an Excel formula, I can give it the mathematical equation. And again, I could type in 1,000 plus 200 like a calculator. The first the first electronic spreadsheet was called VisiCalc, or Visible Calculator. That still has the same problem of being hard coded. Instead, I'm going to click on the cells, or I could type C5 plus C6. Nope, I can do that correctly. C5 plus C6. And when I do that and hit enter, that formula is going to show me the answer on the screen. And if I double click on it, I can see and edit what's happening in the calculation there. You'll notice that, and if I hit enter, I can also, when I'm on that cell, I can look up here in what's called the formula bar to see what the resulting calculation is. Sometimes you inherit a spreadsheet, so you got to see, well, what is it that they're actually doing here? What is the math or the calculation or so forth? And the nice thing about these cell references is that when I type C5 plus C6, just as I would the quadrants, these locations on a grid, that it is that physical location, C5, the intersection of column C and row 5, plus the intersection of column C and row 6. But they are also what are called relative references, meaning that another way of thinking about C5 plus C6 is to say, well, I want to add up the two cells directly above me. That's its relative position. And so if I take that one formula with relative references and copy it to February, I'm going to get 1,200, which shouldn't be a surprise because it's the same numbers. But if I double click and look at, well, what's actually being calculated, it's actually moving the references to the right, and it shows D5 plus D6. And if I do that all the way across again, I'm going to get $1,200 in each one of these, but in each particular month, it's adding up the values in that month. So if I said, well, in June, July, and August, my second job goes away, I can go in, put zeros, and when I put zeros or change one of those inputs, it's going to change the number as a result of the calculation. And so in that way, I can build a spreadsheet that will automatically update. That's the efficiency of Excel. And in this case, I change one cell and another thing updates. But by the time we're done with this, and a relatively simple example that's going to take about 20 minutes, I'm going to be able to change one number. And because a calculation can be based on a calculation, which is based on a calculation, which is based on a calculation, I could make a change to a single cell, change one input or one number, and in the case of the spreadsheet we're headed towards, 36 numbers are going to automatically update. I don't have to redo them in my head. I don't have to redo them on a calculator. I'm not spending time doing that updating. It's just going to happen when I have cell references there. And so, there's a power of using cell references to automate these updates, which could happen, right this minute, or they might happen, a month from now, a year from now, 6 months from now, when somebody says, oh, I need to update that spreadsheet. Again, you can update the values, but the calculation piece will already be set up to happen again. And in things that happen over and over and over again, if I'm creating a weekly sales report and I've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I want to report how much we sold at my restaurant or my store. Again, if I set up the spreadsheet with all the appropriate calculations, well, then all I have to do is type in the number from the cash register in terms of what did we sell today. And so I can put in the numbers for that week, but all the math will automatically happen. We can also automate with cell references, charts and graphs and tables, summaries. And so, it makes it pretty easy to update those kinds of things that I might have to present to my employees, to my manager, to a bank. I can show every week, here's a monthly report on what's happening for our business, and then let employees know, how things are trending up or down or otherwise. I'm going to add another set of items. I'm going to skip a row 8 there just for a little bit of white space. And then I'm going to put in some expenses. And again, everybody's housing or everybody's expenses are going to be a little different, but I'm going to say housing, transportation, and entertainment. And again, most people have lots of expenses. I'm just choosing 3 because I want more than 2. Eventually, we're going to create a total of them. And I could have 10. It just wouldn't fit on the screen. And it's going to take more time to deal with that. One thing you'll notice is when I'm in column B and I'm typing some of these words, transportation and entertainment, they spill over. And if I put in some numbers, so say my rent is $600 a month, I'm going to pay $200 a month for some kind of transportation, and maybe I've got $250 a month for entertainment, food, whatever we might put in that classification. Well, when I put numbers into column C, now I'm cutting off these words in column B. And in that sense, there's a couple things I can do. I can either use shorter words. Maybe I could find something that means the same thing, or I can make the column width bigger. And so if I drag this intersection up at the top, I can control how wide that column is, and it shows me the number, a number of pixels that are associated with that. So sometimes in a SAM assignment, they might tell you, make the column width 120. Or set the size of a column to 20. Again, SAM is going to be very legalistic in those manners. So I've got these 3 numbers, housing, transportation, and entertainment. Let's imagine my assumption is all 3 of these numbers stay the same year round. So I'm going to highlight all 3, but I'm going to copy to the right. And again, go out to column N. It's going to copy them across, filling that set of cells with those values. And now I want to add up these numbers. And I picked some numbers that are a little trickier. There's 3 of them. They're still nice round numbers. So you got 600 plus 200 plus 250. If you can do that in your head, that's $1,050. But again, I don't want to do the math in my head, worry about making a mistake. I don't want to hard code that answer in there. I want to let Excel do the calculation for me in case we do an update later on where we say, well, what if I got a more expensive rent? Or what if I decided to buy a car and there was a $400 a month car payment? We could plug the number in and see what the resulting answers are. And so I want to do the calculation, and I could do what I just did with a formula. I could say equals C10 plus C11 plus C12. And when I hit enter, it would show me 1,050. The problem is, what if I gave you 100 numbers or 1,000 numbers or 10,000 numbers? You would go crazy, and you would, even if I paid you well by the hour, you would find it very much of a bore to sit there and say C1 plus C2 plus C3 plus C4 plus C, all the way out to C9000 plus C9001 plus C9002. The thing would get so long, and there's no guarantee that I might say C9001, C9002, Z9002, and I duplicate a number or I skip a number, and there's no way to really see that very easily or know that I made a mistake. And so instead of using a formula where I use addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, parentheses, I can write out a mathematical equation that you might expect in a math class. I can use what's called an Excel function. And an Excel function also starts with an equal sign. Again, to Excel, the equal sign says something's going to happen, either a calculation or a function. I want you to do something with some of these cells. And a formula is a mathematical equation. A function is something that is programmed to carry out a particular task. And so in this particular case, if I want to add a bunch of numbers together, we might think, well, that's a total, that's what I put as a label. But there is no total function in Excel. The word that they use, which is mathematical, that does mean the same thing, is the sum function. And so I can type SUM. You'll notice there's a bunch of variations of functions that include the word sum. We'll talk about some of those later, but the most basic add up a bunch of numbers is equals SUM. And then in parentheses, it wants to know which numbers do I want to add. And I can either type them in with commas. Again, that's clumsy when I got a lot of data. Or I can use the mouse and highlight the cells that I want. So if I highlight C10 through C12, I'm going to end up with the syntax. I'll use the word syntax. You'll see it in the textbook. The syntax is the language that Excel expects and speaks. And so the syntax is equals the name of the function here, sum. You have parentheses, you put C10 colon C12, which is what is the first cell in this range, what is the last cell, and the colon is essentially telling Excel, add up all the numbers in between, including those two endpoints. And when I hit enter, it will give me 1,050, the correct answer. And if I change a number, so if I said, well, maybe in January I'm at home for a month, so I don't spend as much on gas, so I only spend $100 on transportation. Well, if I change that number in cell C11, the calculation here automatically updates. And when I copy this to the right, because it is, again, relative references, add up the three numbers directly above me, I can copy this to the right, and it will show me what is my total expense for each month. Again, it was $950 in the first month because I lowered my transportation costs, but then in the rest of the months, all the numbers are the same, so they show up the same. But if I go pick a particular month, say May, well, May is adding up things in the column G, which represent May. And so again, I don't have to type the same equal sum, parentheses, highlight over and over and over and over again. You could do it, but again, it would take you 11 times longer than just typing it once and dragging it across. And so that's the kind of efficiency that you will eventually get to be kind of just second nature. And then the last thing I'll add here before we do a couple of other things is, in a budget, you might talk about, do I have a profit or a loss? That's kind of a business accounting term, but you understand the idea that if I said, well, I've got money coming in, that's my total income, C7. Remember, C7 is a calculation. That's the addition. And I subtract C13, which is also a calculation. That's the sum function of the three expenses. If I hit enter, if I get $1,200 coming in, $950 going out, my profit or my leftover money, my savings that month is $250. I have $250 that are available to spend or invest or do whatever I want with. If for some reason I said, well, in January, because we're at home for part of the month due to the holidays, and I only worked half the time, and my income was only $500 from job one. Well, now my income goes down, my expenses stayed the same, and now I actually lose money. I get a negative value. And so again, I can either reflect actual happenings, like in an accounting sense, or in Excel, oftentimes we're looking to the future, thinking about, well, what if? What if I didn't work for 2 weeks and I went on vacation? So my income goes down. I change that value in the spreadsheet. My expenses for entertainment would go up because I got to buy a plane ticket, I got to buy a hotel, that kind of stuff. Again, I could see, well, how much ahead or behind would I be after I think about, well, what if this situation occurred? And then again, I could say, oh, that's I just don't have the money for it, so I can hit undo, or I can put the numbers back that I had previously. Again, one of the key ideas we're going to see again and again and again that Dan Bricklin coined the term "what if" analysis. You know, we can say, what if we can change a number in the spreadsheet? The math will happen almost instantaneously, and then we can decide, oh, that's a good decision, or I guess I can't do that, I'm going to lose money, etc. So, and we can test out all kinds of what ifs. What if I decide to, add a roommate, and so now my rent goes down? Or what if I decide to rent a bigger apartment and my rent goes up? How much could I afford before I start to, run into troubles? Now we have simple calculations here, so some of that you could kind of do in your head if you had only two income numbers and three expenses. But most of us have, much more complicated lives, and certainly businesses have really complicated sets of accounts and levels of income and expenses and assumptions. And so again, spreadsheets help us automate that, so we don't have to think about the calculation part. We just have to think about what is it I'm trying to represent in reality. And this subtraction down here, this is also a formula. It's just subtracting two cells, one from another. That is also relative references. So again, if I copy to the right, if my income stays the same, but my transportation, now goes up, well, my profit goes down, and I could copy all the way across. And each month, it's taking that month's income minus that month's expenses and showing us the result. And so we've got our data, or our calculations here. One thing that chapter 2 spends a fair amount of time on, and I typically even in an in-person class, I don't lecture on it much because some of it is stuff that you have experience with from Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Some of it is stuff that is very similar to other programs, and even the stuff that's not too readily familiar is pretty easy, which is formatting. And so in this case, all the numbers in my spreadsheet represent dollars. But when I just see a number, I don't know, is that dollars? Is that units? Is that cases? Is that truckloads? What's the unit of measure? And so oftentimes in spreadsheets, we want to pay attention to that piece of communication. So I'm going to go highlight all of the cells that contain numbers. I'm going to go up and I could click on the $ symbol. That's one way to format things. And if I click, oops, I got to hit the letter F at the same time. If I were to click on that $income, or the $ icon, it would apply the accounting format, which gives me all the values with a $ in front. That's useful. It puts commas in the thousands place, which also helps with bigger numbers, especially when I have millions or billions or trillions. But it also puts .00 to represent pennies and nickels and dimes, the cents, partial dollars. And in this case, I could leave that. Sometimes I do want to track that. In accounting, if I'm tracking how much cash is in the cash register, how much did we sell, how much should we have given as change, I do want to be very specific and exact about, are we giving, do we have the exact amount of money in my cash register that I should, given the activity. But when I'm talking about a budget, oftentimes, rounding to the nearest dollar. So if I click on this button with an arrow to the right with the zero, I could say, well, let's remove those zeros and round it to the nearest dollar. And I pick nice round numbers anyway, so there's not any rounding well, rounding is technically happening, but, and so in that way, it also makes it a little easier to read. There's fewer places, fewer pieces of ink on the page. And so I can format in that way. And so it's clear that these are all financial numbers. Even though it's a budget typically is in dollars, you could also include other numbers that are not dollars. And in my demo of this, I oftentimes include one last thing to add a number of different elements that show up in chapter 3, which is, say I forgot an item. And so say, I want to add an expense that I didn't include. Again, I don't want to start from scratch and repeat everything that I did here. That's the pencil mode. If I was doing this as pen and pencil on paper, again, I might have to do that because either I got to erase with a big eraser, or I got to rewrite everything from scratch. But in Excel, if I want to add a new line, say right below housing, I could left click on the row number, right click and say insert, and Excel will add a row all the way across. And the other thing that it does is it adjusts the equation. So my sum function used to be C10 to C, what was it? C10 to C12. Now when I shift that row down, or insert a row and everything shifts down, now it's adding up C10 to C13. It's adding up 4 values, even though the 0 here, or the blank cell, is treated as a 0. I could add a new category, and the item that I oftentimes use is retirement savings. And I do this for 2 purposes. One, we will have another video on some calculations I do with finance functions. And, certainly it's never too early to start thinking about investing, saving for retirement. Sometimes that's, hard to hear when you're, perhaps a poor college student, or you're working, and the idea of putting money away for 40 years in the future is, just a distant dream. But it is something to at least consider. And in this case, we want to build a spreadsheet that has this in it, and will help me demonstrate some other concepts in introductory Excel. And so what I'm going to do is, instead of putting in a number, certainly when you save for retirement, you could say, I'm going to put $50 a month into the stock market and forget about it and let it grow until I retire. And so you could treat it just like housing, just like transportation. I'm putting just a dollar amount away each and every month. But a lot of times, and many of you, when you graduate, you'll get a full-time job, and they'll ask you to sign up for a 401k retirement plan. And when they do that, they typically don't ask you for a dollar amount. They will ask, what percent of your income do you want to put away? And the idea is, if you get a job as a new college graduate and you make 50,000, say you put 10% of that away, well, that's 5,000. But if you stay at the company for a few years, you get promoted, you get raises, there's inflation, eventually you make 80,000. Well, now 10% of 80,000 is 8,000. You're going to be able to afford, with those raises and so forth, the ability to save more money. And so the idea is, as you make more money, well, if you keep the percentage the same, then you're going to be putting more money away for retirement. And again, we'll talk about this in a separate video, but that also makes sense because, again, if you at the end of your career are making $200,000, that's the lifestyle that you're probably living, or something near that. And so if you've only been saving money to support a $50,000 lifestyle, going from working to retirement would be a big adjustment. And so you want to make sure that you're putting money away in proportion to what you might want to do when you're in retirement. And again, when we talk about retirement, everybody's vision of that is different. Some people want to go live in a cabin in the woods, not spend a lot of money. Other people want to have, 3 different houses on 3 continents and spend, 4 months a year traveling. There's all kinds of possibilities. And, again, the real world is always somewhat unknown, because obviously you might not make it to retirement. There's health issues, there's medical issues, family issues, all kinds of things that sometimes get in the way. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't plan to save money for retirement. And so let's say I wanted to put away 5% as a student. And so in decimal form, 5% is 0.05. Again, that is true mathematically, but somebody looking at this, they might think, well, that's 0.05, that's 5 cents, that's a nickel. And so I want to apply a percentage formatting. And when I click on the percentage icon, it gives me 5%. I can add decimals if I want, show it as 5.00 to say this is exactly 5.00% to 2 decimal places. And this percentage, this input is in cell G1. And so if I want to calculate how much retirement I would put aside for January, I'm putting away 5% of my total income. I could do this as a calculation, just like a calculator. I could say, okay, take cell C7. That's the amount of money that I made in January. I'm going to multiply it using the asterisk sign, Shift 8, and I'm going to multiply times G1. And 5% of $1,200, if you can't do that in your mind or you don't want to pull out a calculator, that ends up being $60. That is the correct calculation. And in my spreadsheet, the way it's set up, in February, this person's making $1,200 again. So when I drag to the right, as we've done with all other relative references, we would expect I make the same amount of money, I'm saving the same percent, I should save the same dollar amount. In this case, Excel gives me a dash, which is another representation of a 0. And one of the things you will quickly find, if you didn't already in week 1, is that Excel doesn't make any math mistakes. Excel will always do what you tell it to do. And so if you get a wrong answer, it's not because Excel made a mistake, it's because you told Excel to do the wrong thing, or you didn't understand what Excel was doing when you told it to perform something. Maybe you left off a piece you should have told it, or you told it something that was different than what was expected. And so in this case, if I look at the underlying equation, I will see it's taking D7. That's right. That's the February income, but it's multiplying by H1. And what's happening here is that my cell reference, G1, in the initial calculation was a relative reference. So when I copy to the right, the reference shifts to the right. But in this case, when 5% in cell G1 shifts to H1, H1 is blank. A blank cell is treated as 0. 0 times 1,200 is 0. And so again, this is not a math mistake. It's that I told Excel, in this case, somewhat inadvertently, to do the wrong thing. So I'm going to delete that. And the way that I'm going to fix that is with something called a relative or an absolute reference. And the idea of relative references versus absolute references, and then there's a third version, which is mixed reference, where you have a mix of the two. That concept is perhaps the most challenging thing in the first 4 chapters. Now, it's not to say all the other stuff is immediately easy and so forth, but when you're doing cell references, you have to be able to think ahead, think about what do I want the spreadsheet to do? How do I have to write that equation in order for it to do it, and be able to use the efficiency to copy it across? And so if I want to lock in on cell G1, the syntax, the symbol that I need to use is the $sign. So I need to have $G, $1. That makes it an absolute reference. That's the textbook term. That's the Excel term. I sometimes use an analogy to say, well, absolute starts with the letter A. And the idea of an absolute reference is that I'm anchoring that cell reference, G1, is going to stay the same. It's like dropping an anchor on a boat. It's not going to drag to the right, to the left, forward, backward. When I put a lock on the column and a lock on the row, now when I copy that across, C7, the relative reference will change, but G1, because it has the dollar signs, is going to stay in place. And so the advantage of that is I want the month total income to change to reflect the month that we're in, but I want the 5% in cell G1 to stay the same. So if I drag that all the way across, I see my income goes down in June, July, August, so I save less money for retirement. Then it comes back up in September, and so it goes back to 60. And so now I have a spreadsheet where each month's retirement amount is based on this percentage and the amount of money that I make. And I'm going to shrink my magnification here. Yours is probably not quite as magnified, but I do that so you can kind of see a little bit easier. And so now, if I get pretty much all the values in view at once, if I change this and I say, well, what if I want to save a little bit more money? What if I want to save 8%, 0.08? When I change 5% to 8%, all the values in row 11 are going to change. That's the retirement income. All the values in row 14 are going to change, and all the values in row 16 are going to change. And so when I hit enter, make that change, again, you have to kind of watch quickly, but if you wrote down the numbers, you notice, okay, these numbers are bigger in row 11. My total expenses are all bigger by that same amount, and my net income or loss, profit loss, is again shrunk. It goes down, or if it was negative, it goes even more negative. And so, and the same thing if I said, well, what if we only save 2%, 0.02? Maybe I can't afford to put all that. Well, again, now my profit or loss goes up. My losses in June, July, and August are much more, they're smaller. They're less than $100. And so again, in that regard, I can play what if and say, well, could I afford to raise this? Could I afford to save 15% of my income? If I watched a podcast and they said, well, you should save 15% of your income, again, you may want to do that, but your budget may not allow it. And when you're young, and even when you're old, you got lots of expenses that you don't always know about or can't fully control. But again, making a budget helps you plan. It helps you make decisions. It helps you evaluate options, because again, we can't just totally make decisions in isolation. I need to think about, okay, well, now a friend offers to sell me their used car. Can I afford it? How much money do I have coming in? How much money do I have going out? Would it save me money in some area? What about insurance costs? Can I consider that? And so again, when we make budgets, either individually or as a business, again, we're helping to make decisions. And again, part of what this class is involved in is decision making or problem solving for business. Where again, solving problems oftentimes means taking action, making decisions. And so in this case, a budget is one tool that helps us do that. And then the very last thing I'll mention, and then I'll wrap up this particular demo video. So after you get the spreadsheet put together, you'll notice it's quite wide. I can use the scroll bar to scroll left and right. I could shrink the text to make it fit all on one page. Say I wanted to print it, I could go to File, Print, and it will show me a print preview. And what happens in print preview is that you see that the default is a piece of paper that is up and down, that is portrait orientation, and my spreadsheet gets split on 2 pages. And sometimes that's okay, but oftentimes, page 2 is a little difficult to read because I don't have any labels. I just got the months for the end of the second half of the year. I got numbers, but I don't, if I lose the first page, I don't know what those things mean. They're just numbers in isolation. And so one of the things I might want to do is think about, well, is there ways I might fit more of that data onto a single page or all of it? And so in Excel, we aren't going to print much to turn things in an online course, but Sam will still have you make settings as if you were going to print, and Sam is able to check those settings to grade you whether you did it correctly or not. And so if I go to the page layout section, I can change the orientation of the page. It's a drop-down button on the menu. I can choose landscape, which moves the page to a left to right orientation. So now that simple change, when I go to File, Print, will show me a print preview. Now I get all the things out to October on the page. Still have the issue that November, December are out here orphaned on page 2. But I could either change margins. So, there are some settings about how much space is in the margins. I could change that. That's one opportunity. I could also go to, whoops, that's not, I didn't want to click on that. I'm not dealing with pictures yet. I could go to the view menu. And again, when you're working in Excel, typically you're in the normal view, but there is a view called Page Break Preview, which is sometimes helpful, which is going to show you where the page breaks are given your current page layout settings. And so you can see it shrinks it down, so it's a little harder to see, but that's oftentimes true for large spreadsheets. But you can see there's a dashed line that shows me where that page break is that orphans November and December. And I can choose to grab that dashed line, hold down my left mouse button, drag it to the right, and now I've told Excel to fit it all on one page. If I were to go to File and go to Print, now it will show me a preview where all the information is on one page. And sometimes people think that's magic. Like, how does it do that? Again, there's no magic involved. If I'm going to fit more stuff on a single page, everything has to get smaller. And so, what Excel does behind the scenes when I do that with my mouse is it changes the size of everything on that spreadsheet, makes it smaller so that it will fit on a page. Now, if I want to add in November and December, to the other months of the year, that's probably not going to make a big difference. If I have a spreadsheet that's 4 pages wide and I say fit it all on one page, again, Excel will do what you tell it, but I'm going to end up with something where everything is 1/4 of the original size, and I'm going to need a magnifying glass to read it. It's just going to look like really small dashes or grains of salt on the page, and it may be indecipherable. So again, you can't necessarily solve all problems with putting it on one page, but you could decide where the page breaks would happen. Make a logical place rather than in the middle of a year, maybe at the half year or at quarters, etc. It gives you some control that you don't otherwise have. And the other thing in Page Break Preview is that I could say, well, let's move this solid blue line and say, well, I only want to show January, February, March, and I only want to show the income numbers. Now, in a personal budget situation, I can't come up with a real great explanation about, well, why would I want to only show this part of the spreadsheet? But in business, that is oftentimes the case. If I'm a manager of a department, or say I'm a manager of multiple locations of a business, you know, at the high level, I need to manage all the money coming in, all the money going out. I need to, allocate funds. Who are we going to hire for which locations? But when I work and talk to a manager at one location, I might want to isolate and only show them information about their location. The manager of the Minneapolis store doesn't need to know necessarily how much money people in Chicago are making or how much money we're going to give them in advertising, et cetera. Again, it doesn't mean that that information might not come out in other places, but again, in the era or in the interest of kind of focusing attention on a conversation, I can say, well, I'm only going to show you these pieces of the budget that apply to your job, your department, your location. And so again, I can, choose how I want to have that document printed. Or, sometimes I have situations where, the spreadsheet, if I printed all the pages, would print out on 10 pages. Maybe I only want to print page 2 because that's the section that I want to, ask a question about, or I want to bring to somebody to discuss in a meeting. And so in that way, you can pick and choose. You don't have to say print all. You can pick and choose what prints. Typically, when you're done, worrying about printing a particular section or all of the spreadsheet, you'll go back to normal view because that's where you can see things a little bit easier. You got the normal settings for the resolution of the text, et cetera. And so Again, when you're working, you're typically in normal view, but you will switch to page break view sometimes for print settings. And later on, we'll talk about page layout, where you might want to add page numbers or headers or footers or things you do in Microsoft Word. Those things work almost identically to all the other Microsoft products. And so, again, not something we typically spend huge amounts of time on, and not something we do on each and every assignment, but there are some places in the course where you'll be asked to put your name in a header or put the date in a footer, that kind of thing, which is important to know because those things are oftentimes used in business, especially when you print things, because again, knowing when something is printed is important. Is it current? Is it outdated? Knowing where the file was located or who created it would be important, because again, in school, oftentimes, especially in this online asynchronous course where you're working by yourself, you do your own work and you save it on your own computer. In the workplace, you know, you might create a spreadsheet, but all the other people in your department are going to use it. And it might be stored on a location that all of you can have access to it. And so, perhaps I'm out sick that day. Somebody else wants to know, well, where do I find that file, or who, how am I going to get information about that file? They need to know, well, where is it stored, and when was it created, and who created it? That kind of information can be very useful, because in the work world, typically it's not like school where you save all your own files on your own computer and nobody has access to them, and you don't want to share them. In the workplace, the script flips a bit in that you're into collaboration. I'm going to create a file, share it with other people. They're going to add data, share it with me. We're working towards a common goal. It's not like a class where I'm getting a grade to show what I know. In a business, we're trying to support the customer to make money for all of us. And so that is a quick demo of a spreadsheet that does a hypothetical student budget. In this particular spreadsheet, we only have one tab, but I will point out that you can make a name that tab. That'll become important in a later chapter. And in a spreadsheet, you can have a single tab with rows and columns and data, but you can also click the plus sign and add a second sheet. Click the plus sign again, add a third sheet, a fourth sheet. And again, we'll talk about this more as we go along, but certainly you can use that for organization, create budgets by location, create budgets by year, make spreadsheets to track results week by week or shift by shift. Again, we can separate out the information. And then in chapter 5, we'll talk about, well, how do I combine that information? So if I have information on 3 different sheets, can I connect them together with formulas and functions and all the things we will do in one spreadsheet, and accumulate that information for reporting purposes. So we will work our way to that point. But for right now, we're working our way through these first 3 chapters. Again, as always, if you run into problems with Cengage, feel free to reach out to me. Oftentimes, if you're getting an error message, it helps to send a screenshot or a picture taken with your cell phone. Sometimes it helps to send the file that is causing the problem. Again, lots of things can happen, and if I'm not there physically with you, sometimes it's hard to isolate and say, well, this is what's causing the problem. It doesn't mean sharing a screenshot or sharing the file is going to 100% solve the problem. Sometimes we have to reach out to Cengage or the tech desk or others for assistance, but oftentimes for some of the more common issues or the things that students do incorrectly at the beginning of the course, a screenshot or a file or the combination of the two will help me kind of diagnose where you're going astray. Otherwise, best of luck, and we will be in touch soon.